But anyway, so we have a very, very fascinating show. Do we want to bring people up to speed of why we haven't done a show, where we're at, and all that, or you just want to jump into it?
Oh, we can tell people what we've been up to.
You go.
All right. Well, I've been just continuing to work at a university which shall not be named, and then another college which also shall not be named. But adjunct teaching, advising, and then doing some writing projects on the side. I actually have a paper I'm presenting at a theological symposium, academic conference type of thing on Soren Kierkegaard, and trying to write a book with Ken Montville on the nature of theology. So those things have been keeping me kind of busy.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I've moved from Norfolk, Virginia to San Rafael, California. I have a new job. We've talked about this organization, Food Empowerment Project, many times on this show. I'm now an advisor on the advisory board for the Food Empowerment Project. My full-time job now is in defense of animals, but we won't talk about that much. But I'm back in the activist field in terms of animal rights. Other than that, just loving it here on the West Coast. The food is phenomenal. The people are wonderful. It's just really great and better than Norfolk. So,
Well, that's not hard to do.
awesome. So let's get this show started. Enough of our, yay, this is us. Let's talk about the real shit.
Yes, exactly. As much as our adoring fans would love to hear about our lives, I'm sure.
Our one fan. Thanks,
Our
Mom.
one fan, yes.
Hi, Mom.
Well, I
Anyway,
guess two fans because my mom likes us as well.
I think she likes me more because I met your
She,
mom.
you impressed. I think when you met her and my stepdad, you did a very good job of putting your best foot forward.
Anyway, on with the
Yeah.
show.
Yes. So tonight, we wanted to cover the topic of business. Last time Jason was in Norfolk, we had a pretty lengthy conversation about the nature of business. Kind of some of the language has died down. Now the country's obsessed about gun control. But before that, we were talking about the issues of kind of in the heat of the presidential debate about the private market versus the public, not market, but the public, the government's role in people's lives and in the market, and what the role of the private sector and the government should be, and kind of the issues that both kind of inherently have because both of them are filled with people. Um, and I was putting the show notes together, Jason sent me a thing about Hobby Lobby, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then for a long time, we've been trying to talk about microfinancing, which is
For a
kept,
very long time.
which we've kept like literally for months trying to get to. I kind of figured we could put these together and just talk about some different ideas of justice and its relationship to business, and how I as a Christian look at it, and more importantly how we as people can look at it in terms of how just we can expect business to be, or business models to be, as we seek to help the poor, the disenfranchised, etc. So I want to start off first by talking about the article you sent me on Hobby Lobby, Jason. I know you had some thoughts about the Hobby Lobby situation, but would you mind filling us in on the for those who might not know, the issue with Hobby Lobby?
Well, the issue with Hobby Lobby, in my opinion, is a publicity stunt in the same vein as Chick-fil-A, where it uses a Christian agenda to push a message, push an issue at the expense of other people. And what Hobby Lobby is doing, the CEO is refusing to. Well, at first he was refusing to give insurance to his employees because now it's mandated under what they call Obamacare, and he at first refused it. Took the case to the Supreme Court or to court. The judge says that you must give your employees insurance or pay over $1 million a day that you don't. And he came out and kind of refined his story, said that he would give his employees insurance but would not give coverage to him being forced to make employees get abortions, which he believes that there's wording in the health mandate that causes abortion, which does not. He's referring to contraceptions and other aspects of it, but so he's taken a political stance. He's gotten backed behind Pat Robertson, Mike Huckabee, and several other just the typical run of the list right wing fundamentalist. The same people who were backing Chick-fil-A are pretty much backing this, and they're trying to make a big movement out of this, and that's fine. Kudos to them for being creative and not using the same tactics over and over again, but it's at the expense of people, and it may not be in the best interest. I mean, he's paying over $1 million a day because he's not giving his employees insurance, full insurance, which is now mandated. Which looking at it, even if you don't look at it as a Christian, looking at it, it's kind of it's mind-boggling because one, these people are working for you because they love what the Hobby Lobby stands for. The Hobby Lobby is not a Christian group organization. They don't have like Forever 21 and all the other places. They don't have Christian stuff stamped on their products. They're a non-secular group. He just happens to be Christians with strong convictions on contraception. And the fact that he's not giving the people, because he's not really, the arguments that I've been getting in with people were saying that the government's forcing him to pay for abortions, which the government's not forcing anybody to get an abortion. That is furthest from the truth. And they're also upset that, I mean, it's just so many different levels. They're just upset about it. And what really blows my mind is that he's willing to waste $1 million a day and not help his employees get the health coverage they need if they need it. And so it's become this big political campaign, and I think it's a poorly run campaign for the Christian side, and I don't know.
I mean, this is obviously, I don't think we've really talked about the whole healthcare mandate thing, but the narrative that's being shaped is that the government is forcing people to pay for contraception, which, from what I understand, what's actually happening is people, that number one, that's not the case. The government is subsidizing the insurance companies directly so that the insurance companies can offer it regardless of the stance of the companies they partner with or whatever to do insurance with. I mean, that's my understanding, is like, it's not even the companies directly funding it at that point. And they kind of went around that and went to the insurance companies themselves, so that now every insurance company offers it. I mean, that seems closer to the truth from what I've heard than not, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I mean, minor details, but yeah, that's pretty much it. And it's not forcing anybody to do anything that they do not believe in. And right. The arguments that I've been having with people is they're like, well, they're forcing you on this. This is not an issue about Christianity. This is not an issue about abortion. It's about the government coming down and forcing you to do things. And I'm like, if this was truly truly an issue about government control of individuals and making them pay for things that you don't support, then where are the tax resistors, the war tax resistors in this conversation? Where are the people who are constantly put in jail even today because they refuse to pay their income tax, to the federal tax, because the money that we pay to our tax every year goes to help fund and build the war machine? And there's no Christian that I know personally. I mean, I've read about Christians who support, but there's no Christian that I know personally that wants to support the war machine. And if this was about government making you pay for things that go against your values and your Christian beliefs, then why isn't that part of the discussion? Why does it have to be about health insurance? It's somebody pulling the strings here that is not part of the Christian agenda. They're being used on this just the same way they're being used with the Chick-fil-A thing.
Well, I mean, abortion's going to be a big deal for a Christian, but again, from what I understand, it's not forcing the companies to directly pay for it. It goes past the companies to the insurance company themselves, so that the insurance company has to pay for it.
So that's even worse. If let's say that is 100% accurate and truthful, then why is this the owner, the CEO of Hobby Lobby, why is he still wasting all this money to push his agenda to the front page of news? And why is he? Go ahead. Sorry.
Is it? No, just kidding. I'm trying to think of exactly. I was talking to a friend about this last night, because she actually told me that Hobby Lobby is shutting down. The one near her in New England is shutting down because of some of this. So we were just talking about how ridiculous it is, and it just had to do with the fact that, Christians they create a narrative where they whine about what they're losing, and they get involved in this persecution complex, and they never just kind of deal with where they're at and try to be effective where they're at. They spend their energy whining about what they perceive they're losing, which they may or may not be at any given point in history, especially with sort of the way Christianity and evangelicalism has taken shape in the modern political debate. So I don't know who's pulling the strings. I mean, and we've talked about this before. I think when it comes to a lot of the modern political stuff, I think a lot of evangelical Christians fight the wrong battles, and they do so without all of the relevant information.
Yeah. I mean, the banner that they're waving, the biblical banner that they're waving through, that I've seen the most in this, is Acts 5:29, which loosely they say we must obey God rather than men, or follow the law of God and not the law of man. And I don't know, they're being used. I'm sorry. I feel sorry for them, for all the people who jump behind this banner.
I think there are some things about the way. I mean, if we want to talk about affordable health care and the way it was put together, just as like a pure policy, there are some things that could have been done better. And with the abortion contraception issue, I think there was some language that the president went around by using a signing statement so that the language of the bill couldn't be used to do something for abortion or contraception, which is a little sketchy because, anytime you pass something legislatively but then add a signing statement to amend it so it doesn't get used, that part of it seemed a little bit, not sketchy. It was just, the whole thing was kind of thrown together a little too legislatively hodgepodge-ish. But that's an issue of the tediousness of legislation. Yeah. That's not, when it comes to this, again, the facts are out there. The president went to the insurance companies themselves and didn't mandate that the companies pay for it. They're mandating that the companies offer insurance. They're not mandating that they pay for contraception. They're telling the insurance companies themselves they need to pay for contraception. So, yeah, no, I agree. I think, people, unfortunately, the leaders who are able to create the narrative end up wasting a lot of Christians' times by pointing them in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
More so with, I think, the middle-aged and older. I think people our age, even though we're,
I mean, maybe with this case, because people our age are usually more supportive of healthcare issues. But if you look at the Chick-fil-A issue, there was more people our age than the older ones that were of the Christian mind that were supporting that campaign, which is no different from this, except the difference now is that you add $1.3 million being wasted every single day because of the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely think it's a wasted fight. I mean, I would go back to that Chick-fil-A thing only to say that there are a lot of younger evangelicals who are far more pro-gay rights than not, who didn't support that. I mean, you always kind of have these conservative wings of a movement and a liberal wing of a movement and the moderate centrist and all that. But yes, in this case, I think the Hobby Lobby thing is misguided. Although the only issue I have with some of the arguments being made from the government side was one article I read, and unfortunately I'm, as we talked about earlier, I'm internet my internet's bad is what I'm trying to say. And so I can't access the article. I did read one article, and I think one of the government's arguments against Hobby Lobby, because the part of the issue was the owner was trying to say, hey, for religious reasons, I'm not supporting this bill. And again, his reasons for doing so come from a place of not understanding the bill in its entirety. But one of the government's arguments is that people can't celebrate their faith through a for-profit venture. It was something along those lines, something that made me it made me uneasy because, as a Christian, I understand what it means for a person to say, hey, I started this business, either because I believe in it or because it's going to be a good business, but I want to honor God by how I do business. So, worship is a lifestyle. It's not just this segregated from the rest of life thing where it's just this privatized, sentimental thing. Like my faith, is a part of my entire life. So that means that, yes, no, I do worship God through my for-profit business venture, in that I want to do it with integrity and as much as I can run my business through Christian principles. I mean, Christians practice their faith in the marketplace just as much in the church place. So that was the one thing, like the language of one of the arguments about what it means to practice faith. It's not through a for-profit business or whatever.
But then you can't have it both ways. I understand what you're making a statement that the government, that's not entirely true and should not be enforced by the government. But you can't have it both ways. You can't have it where you can open your business and run your business based on principles of faith, but defy, laws that are set to protect the underdog in our society. Minimum wage was set because bosses, Christian and non, are cheapskates, and they don't want to pay their employers. They want to pay them the lowest possible way. So the government had to come in and create minimum wage, so people could survive and feed their family. We still have those arguments that is minimum wage enough, but at least we have a standard. And now, the way I see the healthcare is the same way. I mean, if as a business owner, you are obligated to, there are responsibilities that come along with owning a business, and that one of those responsibilities is making sure your employees are provided for. And if you're not going to offer them health insurance, then you need to offer them, a pay allowance that will allow them not to go into poverty if they get sick or get hit by a car or, have some kind of injury where they can't, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, they need to be able to have some kind of health blanket on there. And that's what's happening here. And just because you're Christian and there's a small bullet point in one of those that you happen not to agree with, you cannot deny individuals their right to a healthy lifestyle.
No,
healthcare.
I wouldn't dispute that. I mean, as far as the whole healthcare thing, I mean, those are, whether or not someone should mandate universal healthcare or not, I mean, that's an issue of policy, and I think it's a little bit more, I don't even want to say morally neutral, because it is an act of compassion to make sure that people have the healthcare they need. We can argue whether or not it's good policy, or whether it's affordable, or whether it fits into a certain economic system well, or whatever. But those are different issues than saying it's blatantly Christian or non-Christian.
Yeah.
With the Hobby Lobby thing, I take it back to the issue of, like, I'm a little concerned about the government's, about one of the points the government made in its case against Hobby Lobby, but I don't think Hobby Lobby is correct, and I don't think the way, like, the Tea Party and others are representing the healthcare law, and a lot of Christians are representing the healthcare law, I don't think they really capture all the nuance of the healthcare law, so that it ends up sounding like the healthcare law mandates forced abortions for anyone, for anyone who gets pregnant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not as radical as people are making it sound.
But people are seriously making it sound that way. Seriously, people are freaking the fuck out and saying that Obama is forcing people to get abortions, even me. That's how they make it extreme. So not everybody gets abortions. Not everybody wants to get an abortion. Just because you have the option to get the abortion doesn't mean you're going to get the abortion. I mean, it's legal in places.
Which is, again, because Obama went through the insurance companies directly, not forcing employers to pay for it. But now, again, like,
because the employers wouldn't do it. If he didn't, then we would have people like the Hobby Lobby where they're like, sorry, you're not getting health insurance because as a Christian, I don't believe in contraceptions, or I believe this contraception is not the most effective, which is what they're saying. And it might induce abortions.
But the point is that, again, just so we make clear what the law actually is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, the law forces insurance companies themselves to cover contraception. And so now it's not even a matter of, so now employers, no matter which insurance they go through, they're forced to cover insurance for their employees. But no matter what, all of the insurance companies will offer contraception. I mean, is that...
But we have to make clear as well, contraception does not equal abortion. It is not the same thing. It is quite the opposite. One's preventative and one's reactionary,
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. So even if you are 110% against abortion, having somebody have access to contraceptions is not going to lead that person to abortion.
Right.
I mean,
there are certain contraceptives that are more dubious in terms of whether or not they're more technically abortifacient, because there's always the possibility that,
like RU148 or the morning after pill.
Yeah. I mean, the morning after pill. I mean,
but that's not a contraception.
Yeah, exactly. It's a reactionary thing. Which, and I even think with the morning after pill, like, I think the chance of, I mean, with some of the contraceptives people rage about, I think the chance of it acting as an abortifacient ends up, it's like a very statistically small chance. It increases the chance by a small statistical margin, but not by a lot of being an abortive substance. I mean, it's still troublesome. Like, I don't like being morally dubious, but I mean, yeah, it is reactive, but it's not as, like, the statistics for creating abortions it elevates slightly like after the decimal point, but I don't think it actually. It's not a huge jump, which still isn't good, but it's still not a
So,
huge.
but with this argument, does Walgreens, Rite Aid, Eckerd's, and all of them, Walmart and pretty much every grocery store, convenience store in this nation, are they supportive of abortion because they sell contraceptions? Every truck stop, gas station supports abortion with this, mentality, with this idea that Hobby Lobby's putting forth. Does he not
Well,
go there?
it seems like the logical thing to ask. Like, okay, we'll eat a lot of Chick-fil-A, but will we stop going to Walgreens? Um, uh,
And
yeah, but people love causes that catch the headlines and that sound. People love someone to sound radical so they can jump on a cause and take the high ground and be just.
But okay,
Um,
wait. I
Very
do
few
I do
people look at the
understand that people.
nuance.
I mean, I've had a lifetime of being in the activist realm and being around activists, and I do agree with you that people do like to do things that make them feel like they're doing for the better good, whether it's animal rights, Christian rights, human rights, whatever. But there has to come a time, and all of these righteous things that people do to make them feel better, you know common sense and critical thinking needs to be involved in that. You can't just and I'm not saying that we are talking about Christians, but I'm not saying this is exclusive to Christians, but people need to just because it sounds good and the person delivering the speech is saying it's so powerful and so emotional filled, it doesn't mean it's necessarily right. You still got to fucking focus in and do some research before jumping that bandwagon. Just because
Well,
this person happened to be Christian and you happen to be Christian and you've been taught not to trust healthcare, and the person talking doesn't support healthcare, doesn't mean y'all share the same views across the board, and people need to just to fucking stop following so closely to people.
no, that's true. I mean, but then again, like you have your again the I don't want to say I don't want to say things like Tea Party crazies,
You just said it.
um, or the Fox News watcher people who like take everything, all of the I don't want to say any names, but who take everything all of their pundits say as ex cathedra, as though it is absolutely true just because the person agrees with what. I mean, people in a lot of these spheres love confirmation, but people love confirmation bias, not just in these
Yeah,
spheres, and in a lot of spheres, people love confirmation bias,
that's true.
um, which the Hobby Lobby thing reeks of. Um, but so do a lot of of the conservative politics, which I mean, I wasn't raised, in a non-believing home, and I was raised in a conservative. I've never really jumped on board with any type of politically left movement to see their own confirmation biases. I'm always kind of an observer on the outside. I'm sure they're there, but being raised in the conservative circles, the believing circles, it's pretty obvious to see the confirmation bias and the cognitive dissonance. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier to recognize. I mean, you understand. You were raised in that sphere too.
Yep. And it still blows my mind. I just don't
But
understand.
and it would be good. I mean, to have some type of reasoned debate. I mean, I've been posting some things on my Facebook this and Twitter this past week. Anytime I see elevated um, social discourse, I saw a few things. I saw one thing where Bill Clinton was talking about the need to be careful when talking about gun control because some things are cultural and you can't just radically jump on. And I mean, because they're not wanting to take people's guns. At least not all of them. Maybe some of the assault rifle, whatever. Um, But you had Bill Clinton saying, "Hey, look, don't demonize people who are passionate about gun ownership." And then you had Roy Blunt, Republican senator, talking about the need for some gun control. And then there was one other thing I saw: Bush's former Attorney General McCaskey talking about how some of the gun legislative stuff, the signing statements, Obama signing statements, weren't unconstitutional. He thought they were maybe distasteful, but not unconstitutional. And same thing with healthcare. So every once in a while, you see these guys come in who are a little bit more maybe statesmanly, or you see them being a little thoughtful. Um, so that's been nice to see, and I've elevated it when I've seen it, because we don't really live in a time in our political history as a country of sane political discourse.
Yeah. We're breeding the new extremism as we watch. It's a really an interesting time in our history, just because that we are breeding a new branch of radicals. You know, the far right, and I hate to put that division up of, it's always the left, it's always the right, it's the conservatives and whatever, but there's no other description that I know of right now to classify them. It is the far right. And
well, it can't be that much different than McCarthyism back in the, like, I guess it was the 40s and 50s. Like, I've been reading a book on the presidents, and I've been seeing The President's Club by Nancy Gibbs and Michael Duffy, um, and just reading through the Truman and Eisenhower years, and it was funny reading it and seeing it and going, this sounds like now.
yeah,
Because you had McCarthy like hunting for communists, and he represented this far right branch of the party that Truman got angry at Eisenhower for campaigning with, even though Eisenhower thought they were nuts too. Um, today you have like these, staunch Tea Partiers, you have your birthers, you have these kind of like really radical right people that all of the smart Republicans, and I'm sure they're there, have to cater to, because they're just this force that's just this force of emotion that's just kind of sweeping the political discourse and radicalizing it.
yeah. They're pushing the boundaries on it. They're pushing the I guess the swing. I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but it's
Um,
very interesting. I mean,
and
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've been reading, I finished listening to an audiobook for Bob Woodward's The Price of Politics, and he talks about the behind the scenes stuff of the 2011 debt negotiations. And it's funny because you walk away with this impression, like whether it's Boehner talking about having to manage his caucus, or whether it's Harry Reid and the Obama administration talking about the negotiation. But, it really sounds like the Tea Party guys are just, they're the radical ones who just kind of kept it any big deal from happening. Like you're not going to get a Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan bargain on the debt because of just this radicalized element within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I want to get to. I don't want to belabor the Hobby Lobby thing so much. I just particularly wanted to highlight those 2 points. The one about how the insurance issue is more nuanced than it's being presented.
Yeah.
And also just to mention about, I am a little concerned. Not concerned. I wanted to highlight the government's argument against that one part of their argument against Hobby Lobby, only because I do get a little worried on the political left of like them defining religion a certain way in a kind of privatized, dichotomized way from like, well, this is public life, and not just public government, but public, like how I live my day-to-day life in front of other people, like how religion doesn't seem to affect that part of their lives. And that's fine. That's
But
one way of
I mean,
looking at it. But for me, it affects my entire life in some form or another.
Yes, but this is no different from the Christian side telling people who are homosexuals that they can cure themselves, and it's not a part of their life. It's not a part of who they are. It's something that's a sickness. It's a sin. They can have it prayed away, or they can't have the same rights as any other person on this planet who's in love, or at least in this country. I mean, I can understand your frustration with what he said about your worldview, about it's not public, but it's no different. And I'm not justifying what he said or supporting what he says, but that statement is no different. It might be no, it's no different than what the Christians do to other people who don't fall in their religious teachings or beliefs.
Well, and I appreciate the analogy there of like, hey, do you see, you know how you're feeling right now? Have you ever considered that they might be thinking this in this issue? I appreciate the analogy there. Um, and again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm terribly frustrated about it, because I'm not. Um, that's always one of the things where I think, John Kerry in '04 in his debate with one of his debates with President Bush at the time, talked about how he can't take an article of faith for himself and bring it into his governance. And he was talking about abortion specifically, but for a religious person, their faith should at some point affect their public life. Like, I don't think you can starkly dichotomize public and private morality. Like, I think that, like, if there are moral principles you believe, fine, then stand for your principles and lose an election if you have to. But I do get worried about how the left defines religion. But I take your point about the issue of homosexuality and how that relates to, like, someone else saying how you need to live your life and coming from without and saying, hey, this is actually how it should be. I can appreciate that.
Well, okay. I don't know that.
But speaking of Tea Partiers, I did want to go into the area of, and you brought up the issue of minimum wage, and I was going to make a snarky comment like, well, Jason, if the private market is just allowed to roam free as a bird, then all things will work out as they should. And I feel it's only fair, so that no one thinks I'm a communist, to also throw out, because the government loves us and has our best interest in mind all the time.
Wait, can I remind? Wait. I have to remind you of our positions in this show, that you are the Christian and I'm the anarchist. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I get it, because you also don't trust the government because you're an anarch. Got it. I'm there. Sarcasm fail.
Yes.
Yeah. As far as the anti-government streak that takes the form of being this extreme, like, pro-business element. I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching the Joe Biden Paul Ryan talks, and their debate they had, and the whole idea of, like, Social Security, for instance, being a guarantee, not susceptible to the markets. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I think Joe Biden's right. Like, I understand, like, maybe you'll get a better return in the market, but, like, to make Social Security, to turn it over to the arbitrary taste of a market that is not inherently altruistic, I think that's a problem when you put that much faith in the market and just trusting the private market to make. Because I don't think the private market's tendency is towards this sort of altruistic benevolence. I think it's more towards selfishness and greed if you let it go there. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I've been telling you the whole time, is when people put too much faith in a book. Anyway, sorry.
I can't make faces at you because my video feed would lag.
I took advantage of that moment.
They're nasty, trust me. I'm flashing you through my hula skirt.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I just had to make that other comparison. So anyway, go ahead.
Anywho, this is not this non-religious life.
Sorry. We just recorded that show, so I'm still in that vein. But anyway, go ahead.
Did you record it just before this one?
Yeah.
That's funny. Um, so I'm playing Jimmy Fallon to your Jay Leno.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, never mind. Yeah, just how, and we've talked about this, just how government, I mean, it's susceptible to corruption. It's slow, it's bureaucratic, it has its own problems. But let's focus specifically on the business end of things, where business is not naturally altruistic. It's not naturally giving. I mean, when you close a charitable tax deduction, uh, deduction thing in the tax code and a deal, and people get on who are a little more well off and talk about almost bragging about the fact that they're not going to give as much because this tax hole has been closed, in order to make a statement about how, well, if you don't give us the tax break, we're not going to give and help society. Like, when that's the case, I really question the charitableness of the free market. Because, and as a Christian, we're not supposed to give because we get a sweet deal out of it. We're supposed to give because we have generous hearts, in theory, and give out of our abundance joyfully, to the point where it may hurt us.
Yeah.
Supposed to give self-sacrificially regardless, not just to our churches, but to anyone in need, to anyone who asks.
Except for the people who need health insurance, and they would be willing to pay $1.3 million a day not to give it to them. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you can argue the merits of good or bad policy when it comes to nationalizing health insurance and the benefits to incentive. I mean, but those are I find that to be more of a morally neutral argument and more of a issue. I mean, the question should always be, how can we make sure everyone has insurance and do it well, not whether or not providing universal health care positively or negatively affects the business world. Because in the end, people need to survive, and it can't just be about the bottom line.
Yeah.
As a Christian, it's not just about meeting the bottom line and making sure business feels cozy so that people can come in and make a profit, so that their CEOs can get paid exorbitant amounts and they can increase shareholder value. In the end, people are working and trying to live, and that's where the Christian's concern is, not about satiating greed at the top.
But I think the philosophy is moving closer to that belief than what you would like for it to. I think it's moving. The bigger movement is trying to push all of Christian thought to think about the people on the top less about the people who are on the bottom, or at least in the middle.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been reading about, and writing this paper on Kierkegaard, I've been reading about the Moravians, specifically the ones led by Zinzendorf. And he talked about how, I'm trying to find exactly where he talked about how they ran their, oh, here it is. It's on page 24 of Christopher Barnett's Kierkegaard, Pietism and Holiness. And he talks about the Moravians, how they developed into an industrious and prosperous community. So they lived by the Protestant work ethic. They believed they needed to be diligent because they were doing their work unto the Lord. But nonetheless, its members agreed to eschew practices associated with open markets, and they prohibited competitive trade, and they ensured that they ensured good work and fair wages for all. So not good wages, not competitive wages, fair wages that honored the good work that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought about, this push towards open markets, this push towards competitive trade. And here you have this community of Christians who are like, no, people need to work, but they should get a fair wage for it. And they shouldn't have their livelihood jeopardized. And far too often the way in our globalized business models, we tend to ignore how those decisions affect the bottom. And, we talk about what good business means. It might affect the community overall in the long term of the world and people's prosperity overall. But we kind of focus at the top at the expense of the people at the bottom. And so I've actually become a little bit of a bigger believer in fairer wages like the minimum wage, even though people would love to see it abolished on the right, because it would be better for a business to make a profit. And
so they could have their own sweatshops, so they could have their own slave labor. I mean, we've talked about this many of times in this program. Our worldview has changed so much that I guess it hasn't changed. It still continues the same, and we just haven't done enough to stop it. But the business owners and including the farmers want to pay. They don't want to pay their workers so they can make more profit, so their family and their pocketbook will grow. And it still continues that way. And there are still people who are trying to put legislation into place where, well, as you said, abolishing minimum wage, and so they can make more money from their product. And it's sick. It's gross.
Don't get me wrong. Like, if a business is doing well, then sure, when you can afford it, expand, open another store. I mean, if you're doing a business and people, like it and you're doing a good job, I mean, great. Then, you should be able to expand, because hopefully you're doing a good job,
but not at the expense of your workers.
Well, yeah, you're not going to treat, as with all things, every Christian employer needs to remember, like, how would you like to be treated in this situation? And, I think of, I think it's Danny Wegman. I think it's with Wegmans. They could aggressively expand if they wanted their quality to go down.
Mm-hmm.
They're one of the best companies in the country, but they don't aggressively expand. They open a store when they can afford it, and they don't allow the quality of their workers. They don't allow the quality of how they take care of their workers to go down, or the quality of what they offer. Now, I don't know if there are any unjust practices they do under the table or whatever, but from what I understand of their business model, it's a pretty healthy one that's value driven and not just profit driven. And that's another issue, is like, making sure that, you've talked to me before about like paying people what their work is worth, not what you can get for it.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between greed and the way an economy should work, when you pay people, what their stuff's worth.
Yeah. We talk about it all the time, is like how off the air, how would we go about doing this? But around the corner, we have a bakery from our new home that's employee owned, and every worker that's in that place owns a part of that business, and that's the business model for it. There's I can probably count 15 that's just on this one street that are employee owned businesses, and they're the happiest workers I've ever seen. They are helpful. They're it's very pleasant to go into places like that, and it's because they're there because they love what they do, and they have some say in the business. And I'm not saying that every company needs to turn their business into employee owned, but they need to at least consider treating their workers as as if they're a part of the owners, to give everybody input. Bob's Red Mill wasn't an employee owned business, but when the owner retired, he gave the company over to all the employees and turned it into an employee. It's not like, I hear people always argue, is like, well, businesses like that, employee owned businesses and co-ops or whatever, they don't work. They can't function. But here in San Rafael and Marin County, pretty much every business is run that way. It happens. It's just, I think the people who are saying that it can't have one or two issues. One, that they have invested interest not to embrace that model and they want to care about profits more, or they're just not aware of the issues.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of a smooth way to transition this into microfinancing. Maybe we could, do some kind of grand, like,
Well, you want to do microfinancing in 9 minutes? 'Cause that's what we
yeah,
got.
let's do it. Because, I think we can cover it. Because, I mean, we're talking about economic models and free market models. And microfinancing follows a open market capitalistic model, and it doesn't really question that model or works within that model. And it's one way that people have tried to utilize the free market and capitalistic economics in order to help other people and make them self-sufficient. And one example of this is Grameen Bank, founded by Muhammad Yunus. And our audiobook on Audible for the free trial that we were recommending is Banker to the Poor by Muhammad Yunus. And it's a good book. I mean, obviously, any book like this kind of toots its own horn. But he advocates he explains his reasons for doing microfinancing, and he advocates for it. And in theory, when you first look at it, when I first heard about it back in 2010, maybe 2009, it initially sounded like a good idea, because instead of just giving to people, just to meet their temporary needs, the idea is you're investing in them through a microloan of maybe no more than, $50 to $100 to $500 that they pay back, but they initially invest into the business. They start their own business so they become self-sufficient. This is especially good, in theory, for women who, and this, Eunice talks about this, for women who are marginalized in society, for them to become self-sufficient, especially if they're widowed or, they don't have family, or they're orphaned, or just whatever, or they're coming out of sex trafficking. They can start a business, become self-sufficient. So it has a lot of benefits that get touted. The only problem is that they charge a 20% interest rate on the loan.
That's pretty steep.
And a lot of that, I mean, it said that a lot of that takes care of because these banks are non-traditional banks, they need to take care of their own expenses, and thankfully the loans are pretty small. But one of the issues I ran into in defending microfinancing to a friend of mine, she brought up the issue of like, well, as a Christian, do you believe you should charge interest? And I just kind of realized, there are plenty of areas where the Bible in particular talks about not charging interest. So she kept them. And initially I was very angry and mad. Like, no, this is a good idea because it makes them self-sufficient and helps them benefit over the long haul, which is, there are mixed reports about its efficiency in doing that. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, because I said, well, it works in a free market or it works in a market-based system. And she's like, well, you don't really question the benefit of that system, do you? You just assume that that's the system you need, and then you never question the system it's a part of. And that's true. And but she brought up that issue, the question of like the high interest rate, especially for people who may not, because there are some that treat their people well. There are others that are, sharks who exploit people through the microfinancing system. But what do you think of the microfinancing interest rate issue?
Well, it sounds, on face value, it sounds more of, because we're not talking about people like you and I, where we're looking to get a loan to start, a small business or something. We're not talking about middle class people who come from privileged backgrounds looking for loans. We're talking about people who have no wealth in their background or have no history of any type of financial or economic structure in their lives or in their culture and society. So jokefully, with a little truth, it kind of sounds like if you get the bad person, if you get the bad loan, it's more of a mafia issue, because even if there is no interest, there is a little bit of play with kind of kind of a slave wage, or kind of a wage slave. I can't talk, because you're in debt to this loan, and I know that there are some companies out there that they don't put any debt or repayment policies on it, which is good. But going about your interest, I've not been in a situation. I don't know what the details are, because the interest is supposed to, in the economic channel of things, is supposed to be what helps fuel the company being able to reloan and stay and keep their lights on and keep their business on, and that's what the interest is. It's not supposed to penalize the person who borrowed the money, but we flip that on the head with modern day economics, and interest now is to be punished, is used as a form of punishment, because you'll be paying. Most people are paying the interest off of their loans their entire life and never actually pay for the loan itself. So without looking at an example of like pulling off one company who's doing this and kind of dissecting it, I can't give a good answer on it because I don't know the details.
Okay. So, I mean, would you be totally against the idea of charging high interest rates? Because there are some, I know, Muslims don't like usury in any form, so they have their own banks where they don't charge interest at all. I know there are a lot of Christians who don't feel good about interest, the whole borrower is the servant to the lender thing. I pulled a couple of scriptures, that talk about not charging interest, specifically in Israel, in ancient Israel, about not charging interest to fellow Israelites, which in the New Testament, one could argue, gets universalized. So does the high interest rate bother you at all, or is it situational? Or
Well, I have no book that I can reference to that gives me my worldviews on interest. But I high interest rates on growing countries, growing cultures. I think I deeply feel that there is a better model out there than penalizing people. And again, we're not talking about middle class Americans looking to get a loan. We're talking about brand new, villages that are trying to bring in income and trying to grow their village into a town so they can, whatever it may be. And I don't believe the interest, unless that interest is going back into that community. I don't think the interest model is the best, the model to be used, and which the best model, I don't know. I mean, I'm not immersed in that, so.
It's tough because I like the self-sufficiency. I mean, because there is if a person kind of makes their own way, or, there is something to be said about like the benefit for the person of becoming self-sufficient and taking pride in their work or whatever.
But just to clarify, these types of loans are not to better an individual. They're blanketly. I mean, I'm sure there are some that work on an individual basis, but traditionally they were built to help build societies, to build culture, to build an establishment and areas of the world where they were still living in tribes or still living in small villages.
That's true. And Grameen offers their loans, I believe, to groups. I think some other organizations tend to offer them to individuals a bit more, but that is true. And that way the group held everyone accountable for repaying the loan.
Well, that just gives kind of, I guess, if we're going to talk of support and the benefits of repayment of the loan, as the group, I guess if you're going to do interest, it gives, I'm reaching deep here to find justification. It gives motivation for the group to work together to pay back the loan, so they're not in debt. But I'm not a fan of punishment for punishing the person for helping. I helped you, now I need to punish you so you can help me. And that's the way I view the loan situation. But anyway, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I got nothing else.
Okay. I don't know. I think we need to pull up individual examples of what people are doing and kind of look at that so we can have a more solid conversation on what works and what doesn't, because we're just kind of pulling out of a bag right now.
Yeah.
I mean, because our conversation so far has been based. We're trying to base it into a world that we are not aware of, and pulling our experiences out of a world that we are aware of, and both structures are completely night and day. The interest structure here in the States for people who take out loans are for vastly different reasons than the loans that people were taking in third world countries and for these microloans type things. So it's kind of hard unless we can look at an example to discuss that. So maybe that's our homework for next time, because we are out of time.
Has that time come?
Yeah, that's it. So I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for listening. It's good to be back. It's good to talk to you again, Matt. It's been a while since we've chatted. A little rusted. I wasn't prepared for this show as much as I would like to have been. Actually, I wasn't prepared at all, but don't tell anybody. But if you have any questions, just give us a call. The Zombie Popcorn Hotline, go to zombiepopcorn.com. Hit the contact page. All of our contact information is there. You can send us an email. You can give us a call. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Google+, Stitcher, Smart Radio, iTunes, everywhere that good podcasts are served. You can find us there. You can also find us on YouTube. But most importantly, zombiepopcorn.com. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.